Thanks a million for having me on The Word this evening. I'm delighted to be here. I thought I would get things kicked off with a song of mine called Beara. Beara is the Queen of Winter in Scottish mythology. You'll also find iterations of her in Irish mythology. But this is a song I wrote in the middle of summer when I was pining for winter, which doesn't sound like it makes sense, but I guess it's about needing a balance between dark and light, I suppose. So this is Beara.
Pair of gloves. He'll try to hold my hand, but he won't get close. Here we are at the turn of July, in floods of aching light, and I don't know why I'm defined by the shifting moods of the wild. Beara, you are alone in summer. You crave the glow of a low light. You're not what they say you are, the dying embers, the cold that brought us too far. I keep you in my sheath and draw you when I need to see if I can see both sides. Clouds trickle by without a sound. They hang upon the air and bear their weight down. Didn't I pine when you carried the swallows away for another year? But they came back and I barely noticed their song fall in my ear, and I don't know why I'm defined by the shifting moods of the wild. Beara, you are alone in summer. You crave the glow of a low light. You're not what they say you are, the dying embers, the cold that brought us too far. I keep you in my sheath and draw you when I need to see if I can see both sides. I keep you in my sheath and draw you when I need to see if I can see both sides, to sharpen my view of both sides. go looking for the dark, but I'll move willingly when it comes back.
Sive, thank you so much. That was absolutely beautiful. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. We are so delighted that you have joined us for this edition of The Word. I think it's going to be a really beautiful one. I hope you have your cup of tea ready. So The Word is brought to you by Sligo Library, and I'm here to welcome you on behalf of Sligo Library. And we do this in conjunction with IT Sligo, the BA in Writing and Literature. So this evening we are delighted to be joined by writer and broadcaster Sinéad Gleeson. You're so welcome. And she will be in conversation with Una Mannion. And as we've already heard, Sive will provide us with just absolutely incredibly beautiful music for the evening. So we're in for a treat. Before I start, just a tiny bit of housekeeping. If you can, please keep your profile mute during the readings. You can use the chat option to let us know your questions. Una will remind you that later as well. And I'll read those out a little bit later on. Those taking part in the open mic later, you'll be invited to unmute yourselves as we get to that point in the evening. So just keep your eye out for that. And before I hand you over to Una, I also wanted to let you know about April's edition. Una Mannion herself will be our special guest, where she'll be talking about her acclaimed debut novel, The Crooked Tree. And next Thursday, the 8th of April, we'll be hosting the official book launch of our former colleague, Louise Kennedy. So we can't wait for that, and you can register for a ticket for that on Eventbrite. So without further ado, I will hand you over to the wonderful Una, and looking forward to the evening. Thanks, Una.
Welcome everyone to The Word Online, and I'd really like to thank Michelle Brennan, especially who organises The Word, and to thank Lou for hosting this evening, and also Alice Lyons, who curates the event and has done so much to organise the series of speakers over the term. And to welcome this evening Sinead and Sive, and thank you, Sive, for the beautiful song. And just to remind everyone of what Lou just mentioned, if you could ask your questions and have those ready, and Lou will ask them during the Q&A. It's an honour to welcome Sinead Gleeson back to Sligo, albeit online, and to have the opportunity to talk to her about The Art of the Glimpse, her most recent anthology, Constellations and writing generally. Sinead, as Lou mentioned, has worked as an arts journalist and broadcaster and presented the book show for a number of years. She's edited 4 anthologies now. In 2015, she published The Long Gaze Back, an anthology of Irish women's writing. And in 2016, brought out The Glass Shore, which focused on women's writing from Northern Ireland. Both books won the Best Irish Published Book at the Irish Book Awards. And then in 2019, she brought out her own book, Constellations, which is a collection of essays. I'll just hold up the beautiful cover, which has now been translated into multiple languages, has won multiple awards, and won the Best Nonfiction Book of the Year at the On Post Irish Book Awards this past year. And then in the autumn, and I'm just going to lift it. She published The Art of the Glimpse, 100 Irish short stories, and just it's an epic project and a gift to Irish writing. So I welcome Sinead, and I suppose I'd love to start to talk to you this evening about The Art of the Glimpse, and about how the project came about, the process of editing, and maybe you might mention the choice of title as well.
Sure. There's a wonderful British publisher called Head of Zeus, and this is a thing that they do. They do anthologies, and they have to be 100 stories. There's no negotiation. And I own quite a few of them. There's a couple of them knocking around here. They've done ghost stories, and they've done sort of sci-fi. Frank Wynne did a brilliant one, an LGBTQ one most recently. He's also done one on translation. There's been one on women. So it's a brilliant big kind of book. And Neil Belton, who is the publisher there, who was himself, an editor at Faber for years. He edited John McGahern's work. Said I'm on the lookout for an Irish one, a kind of a greatest best of 100 Irish stories you should read, and you've done an anthology or two, maybe you'd be interested. And as I say in the introduction, like when somebody asks you to do something like this, you do have a total amnesia where you just go, you forget about how much work's involved, and you go, oh God, I love the idea of curating something like that. And 100 sounds like a lot, and then I realized it isn't a lot really when you start putting the work in. But the titles can be tricky things, I think, as any writer or editor will tell you. And this one came to me a few years back when I was editing The Glass Shore. I discovered a writer called Margaret Barrington, who's from Donegal, who was for a time married to Liam O'Flaherty, who's another great short story writer. Both are in this collection. And there's a very hard to find collection of Margaret's short stories that was only published in the months after she died in the early 80s. In the introductions written by William Trevor, who's also in The Art of the Glimpse. And William Trevor described Barrington's gift for the short story as a form, as the art of the glimpse, the ability to just get a small sliver, a little look inside somebody's life or situation. And I think it's a brilliant description of the short story. That is exactly what it is, like Mary Lavin's description of them as arrows in flight. I think this one is this is where it came from. So it just came from the idea of putting together 100 stories and how I might shape, include, and what I wanted to put into the book. So yeah, it was a lot of work, but it was, I've been working on anthologies for years, so there's a lot of stuff I hadn't included in previous ones. So I have loads of collections in the house. I'm always picking up anthologies. I'm reading journals as well to find new work, and the stories I couldn't fit in the Long Gaze Back and Glass Shore. So I tried to convince myself I had a bit of a head start on it, but as ever, took a good while, but it was fun.
Thank you. And can I ask, this time around, in the Long Gaze Back, you organised the stories, you curated them in a particular way. And this time you used the alphabet. And for everyone in Sligo, we love to see Leland Bardwell open the collection. But I was wondering if you could talk about what that means to have just how you organize the stories in that sequence, and maybe some of the interesting collisions or juxtapositions or the synergy that happens because of that organization.
Yeah, I mean, I decided very specifically with the Long Gaze Back to arrange the writers in the book chronologically, because as the title of the book suggests, The Long Gaze Back, I was trying to redress the lack of balance in previous Irish anthologies and how often and how easily women were excluded from those anthologies. So the Long Gaze Back is literally me looking back over my shoulder. So it had to be chronological, going all the way back to, as it does, to the late 1700s. So it had to be that way. Whereas a book like this, it's a bit more democratic, and a lot of the writers are alive. And it just seemed to me, I couldn't decide what would be the opening story. It would be too difficult. So it made a lot of sense to me to make it, to put the work together alphabetically. And then, of course, you get runs of stories where there's lots of people who are all still alive. I think there's a section in the middle is about 15 stories of all living writers, which is unusual. But it was merely just a kind of democracy of it, to sort of, and a lot of anthologies are kind of arranged that way. But I was making a much more political point, I think, with both Glass Shore and Long Gaze Back, to show the breadth and longevity of women's writing, and how those women were always there, even if they weren't always included. So with this one, I mean, you find that all my experiences of anthologies have been, you find work that ends up in conversation with other stories, and in this story, I remember like Mary Dorsey, who's a wonderful poet who I met for the first time up in Anna one time I was there, and I was explaining how I was working on the constellations and the essays, and she said to me, oh my God, I said, I stop and I start and I go off and research a bit and I stop, and she went, oh God, that's a terribly unproductive and horrifying way to write. And she said to me, maybe there's another way of doing it. And she was leaving early the next morning and left a collection of her poems outside my door, and she wrote inside, write with the handbrake off, which I really liked. But Mary is such an interesting figure because she's a poet and short story writer. She's one of the very, she was doing an awful lot of activism in the 80s, 70s and 80s around queerness, about being a vocal gay woman. When it wasn't very easy to have those conversations and people weren't speaking up and there was a lot of fear. And Mary's story is right beside Emma Donoghue's story, which is also a wonderful queer story from a couple of collections back by Emma, and they're right beside each other. And I think both of them have sort of mentioned to each other that it's wonderful to see that Emma was obviously maybe looking up to the generation that came behind her, where it would have been, you can say what you like now in stories and fiction, nobody says anything, but it would have been very difficult back then to be writing about anything that especially that that kind of ran butted against the Catholic Church and the kind of ethos and thinking. And as we know, homosexuality was illegal until 1993, incredibly, in Ireland. So both of those women and a lot of the writers in this book, Brendan Behan's story, the version of the Brendan Behan story in this book is a very hard to find version, and it was because of an academic in UCD. It's a much more queer version of the story. It's very much addressing his bisexuality, and he published it outside of Ireland and then panicked at the idea that this version might be seen in Ireland. So it hasn't been for a long time. It was published in a French journal in the 50s. So finding things like that are a real kind of trove, and they sort of speak a lot to what was happening in Ireland and how people laboured under the mantle of the church, and how morality was such a very big cloud over a lot of the work in this book, I think, not just the ones that relate to sexuality.
It's really interesting. I know that you've mentioned before about the anthology is sort of a way to is a barometer or a way to take the temperature of a nation, and yet this anthology spans from 1850 all the way to the contemporary story. And I'm just wondering, I think you're already hitting on that a little bit, but like what kind of temperature is it taking, and what do we learn about Ireland and the Irish concerns?
Yeah. I think one of the things, every time you are going to edit a book like this, it can't be like the other ones, and I think you have to try and do something different. Obviously, the framework of this particular series, the 100 stories, means you don't commission any new work. It has to be work that exists, that has been published or is about to be published. It would have been another 3 extra years if I was commissioning work, I think. But it means you're a little bit hamstrung in terms of you can't get necessarily right up to date. But I did try to do that. And what I mean by that is, as well as representing new voices in Ireland, whether that's new Irish voices or diasporic voices, or people who've come to live in this country and make their life here who are very much Irish to me. People like including Owen de Vardoon's wonderful folkloric story, which is rooted in his traveller culture, was also very important, because again, often with anthologies you have to look at what's included and who's not included, and whose voices are we not hearing, whether that's at literary festivals or in anthologies or at events. And I think it's always very important to make sure to look around and as much as you can and try and be more inclusive and try and focus on voices. And Owen's not there by any stretch because I wanted a voice like that there. I read his whole collection and I just found it really transportative and magical. I'd read it before I knew it was coming. I had heard it was coming out, so I asked for a copy in advance so I could have a look and see if I could put the work in there. But I suppose the more newer work in the collection is trying to address possibly the social upheaval we've seen in Ireland in the last few years, the cultural shift, the political shift, whether that's referenda or the change in kind of reverence for the church, or just the fact that we used to be a very monotheistic, mono-white country, and that's thankfully changing. I think the multiculturalism and the diversity element that's going on in modern day Ireland is a good thing, and yet that's not very present in a lot of older anthologies, because Ireland wasn't like that, or if the work was there, people maybe didn't go looking for it. So yeah, I hope the newer work reflects that. But it is interesting to look at the older stories and as a reminder of often how bleak things were. And I think this there's a lot of stories in this book about emigration, and Ireland is emigration's not the permanent American wake thing that it used to be, that people never came back, and it was driven by poverty. It wasn't driven by circumstance, or you want to go and live and work somewhere else, or you want to travel the world. It was often that you just had to, and there's a lot of very lonely stories like that. So you don't really see those immigrant stories in the Irish short story anymore. If you do, they're very different, and they're a less permanent solution. So it's good to look back and forth and compare.
I was one of the things when I teach online at the moment, and so a lot of my students are sitting in front of their bookshelves, and I see the spine, and I literally over and over again, and it's been so brilliant. And I've been watching like Kat Hogan doing the 100 days of the Art of the Glimpse, and today is day number 97. Like all these people reading the stories day by day together. And it's incredible really that all these writers are being introduced and that there's a whole community of people in Ireland reading them. And in your anthology, there was a clause that really struck me. You said an anthology is a gift. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that, because I see the gift, I see the gift that it is given to us. And I just was wondering if you might talk about what you meant when you wrote that.
Sure, yeah, and I don't necessarily mean here I'm giving you a gift. Aren't I great? That's not what I mean at all by that. What I mean is I find the anthology as an article, as an object, any anthology is a gift, because I tend to buy them anyway. I have anthologies from all over the world, whether that's queer writing or Brazilian writing or writing in translation, and what I love about them is that I will, without fail, I've never picked up an anthology in my life and went, I know everybody in this book. It's always happened that there'll always be somebody that you might know, that you might have read, or you'll know the name, or there'll just be loads of people in that you don't know. So what I love about them is that they are a bit of a grab bag. They're a miscellany, and they're an opportunity to discover new writing. And that's happened to me with writers I've ended up including. Like I've talked about a lot about someone like Nora Holt, who I consider to be one of the great forgotten writers. And I know Una, our mutual friend, Louise Kennedy, has done a lot of brilliant academic work on Nora. And I kind of feel that someone like Nora, people can get very easily forgotten. And Nora was one of those examples. And I found her in an anthology. It was in Cutting the Night in Two, a wonderful anthology edited 2001 maybe. And I found, I thought, what is it? Who is this woman? What is this story? A story about sex work that was published in the 1940s. She was extremely banned. Lots of her work was banned. And of course, that story would have been. And how risk-taking and how brave, and how it must have got her into a lot of trouble. And maybe she paid a high price because, she didn't have the same visibility as contemporary writers at the time, like the Frank O'Connors or Mae Brennan in the US, for example. And I feel that, that can, so I think of them as a gift in that I found writers as a reader and as an anthologist by reading other anthologies. And there's literally people that have passed me by, and I found them through books that have 30 writers or 50 writers inside them, not edited by me. But that's why I think of them as a gift. You can find out a lot about a lot of writers by just dipping in, And you spend 10 pages with someone, so it's not if you don't like it, it's not really like you've waded through 400 pages of a novel. So that's also the reason why I love them, the brevity of it.
Thank you. And so you've 4 anthologies, and you've spent a lot of time, I suppose, promoting and developing other people's work. But you also brought out your own collection, Constellations. And I was wondering if you would, I know you're going to read a little bit tonight for us from Constellations, but if you might, just before you do that, talk a bit about that project, that collection of essays, and I suppose what holds them together, and then maybe introduce the piece that you're reading from.
Yeah. The best thing about a book of essays is that you can convince yourself you're not writing a book, because I wasn't writing a book. I was working on the pieces in a very singular way. I started with the first piece I ever published was published by Banshee in the first issue of Banshee. And when that was accepted, I started working on another piece. And again, I didn't tell anybody until the Banshee piece came out. I think nobody knew I was writing. I just didn't want to tell anybody in case I decided to back out of it or wouldn't do it. And because the essays are very, like the short story, it's a very singular form. You can write them one at a time. You can move from one to the other. You could decide there's 10 in a book or 20 or 15. You can decide if they have they link and overlap, or if they're completely more of a miscellany and standalone. I think there's 2 parts to Constellation. Lots of it is absolutely linked, and then lots of it is pieces don't relate to each other at all, which is kind of what I like myself in a collection of essays. So it came about like literally brick by brick, building an essay at a time. And I think when I had 3 or 4 essays, I was shortlisted for this a prize that I always tell people to enter, which is coming up again. It's called the Deborah Rogers Prize, and you can enter if you have a novel, short stories, or essays, nonfiction. You need about 25,000 words, so you need to be kind of committed and serious and have something, a piece of serious work in progress on the go. And I entered it more because I thought I'll just see if there's interest, or am I wasting my time, or what will happen. And there was about 900 people entered. I got to the last 8, and I think every one of those 8 people all got signed by the agency, RCW, which is my agency and your agency, and all got published. So it was the kind of the boost I sort of needed, because I still didn't think I was writing a book until I got to that point where you have to then write a synopsis of what you think your book is and give it a title. And of course, it wasn't called Constellations then; it was called something else. But it did give me the impetus to try and finish it. But it felt finishable to me. I was busy, I was working, I had multiple jobs and family commitments, and an essay at a time seemed all I could manage. I don't think I would have had the engine, the fuel for the engine of a novel at that point. So yeah, that's how it happened, in a very incremental way.
Thank you. So Sinead, do you want to, I know you're going to read from the adventure narrative, sure, and maybe you might talk about that piece and read for us.
Yeah, I kind of thought, because of where we're all at, I don't know about you, and particularly this lockdown, I'm just really feeling, God, I'd love to go anywhere, see someone, do something, just anything that isn't the kind of same rhythms and Groundhog Day-ness of everything that's gone on. So I've been thinking about places, and I've been thinking about the horizon, and the adventure narrative very specifically comes after a piece in the book about my grandmother and my great-grandmother, both women who grew up in tenements in Dublin, who were very poor, who never went anywhere. My grandmother didn't even have a passport. And I thought a lot about those women, and women who do get to leave, and how, being an adventurer or getting to travel the world is the ultimate in privilege, and being able to do things. And it's different for women, as we know. And Rebecca Solnit, who's one of my favourite writers, has written a lot about how women don't get to be psychogeographers and adventurers in the same way that men do, because safety, as we've recently seen with high profile cases in the UK, is a huge issue for women. So I'm going to read a little bit from the end of the adventure narrative, because I'm thinking a lot about the horizon. To set out for the horizon is to head towards its shimmering line. Every time I arrive in a new place, I drop my bags, turn on my heel, and begin to walk. There is alchemy in being an outsider, of passing locals who don't know you're not from a place, blending in with every block, each corner turned. There are choices. Use Google or buy an actual map. Go outside, turn left or right, cross traffic junctions past honking cars, stick to the circular path of a small town, or veer to the outskirts, to the sea or fields, to the hinterland. Seeking out the borders. In new places there is a natural gravitation towards the edges. I feel uneasy until I've walked a place. Long journeys can deplete and disorientate, but as soon as I start to wander, I acclimatise. I crave transactions, buying coffee or gum just to hear new accents, to feel unfamiliar currency. With adventure comes anticipation, a necessary kind of blindness, facing into the unknown miles ahead. The lure of unplanned travel is its own mystery. On the parallel track of discovering new people and paths, there is a part of the traveller waiting to be revealed. Departing requires physically leaving behind an old part of yourself. Perhaps this residue, physical or emotional, is too painful or precious to carry with us, and necessitates being discarded. Leaving something familiar behind can be a beacon to light the path back home, a candle in the window. Each footstep on a journey moves the traveller away from one life and into another, and perhaps the memory of the peace left behind sustains even the weariest nomad. Untethered to us, that part of ourselves that stayed back might have changed. There's always the option of reclaiming it, certainly, but new paths and red hills may have already begun to nudge it out of the frame. It may feel magnetic, at least in the mind, when it has already been displaced by something newer. On my own, in Malin town, in the very north of Donegal, I experienced 2 very different days. One is bright cyan in every direction, the small village green bathed in rays so hot they almost singed the grass. Out at Five Finger Strand, a pale spine of sand, there are warning signs not to swim due to dangerous currents, and more warnings for collapsing dunes. The danger in nature is never subtle, even in places of great beauty. 360 degrees of eye-watering brightness. 24 hours later, rain is firing down onto the street in spears. I set out for Malin Head, the site of a famous weather station known from the shipping news and sea area forecasts, on the most northerly point on the island of Ireland. Circling the town, there's a harbour where waves scale up 4 metres like a skate park bowl. The wind is strong, orchestrating a shrill howl, but the bulk of the noise is from the fishing boats jostling against each other, port and starboard abutting. The weather station takes a while to find, eventually located because of its visible masts. I'd been expecting a mini fortress, austere and remote, but it's quite small and unimposing. My imagination had conjured up something more mysterious, not a modest civic building in a quiet, sea-battered town. There is an old Coast Guard's office, the arrival point of many long-ago radio conversations, calling out to lost ships on the Atlantic, a place of Morse-coded rescue. I'm a complicated traveller. The lure of it, the distance and promise of unfamiliar views compel, but often the reality, or the shortness of the trip, disappoints. It has changed too since becoming a parent. I always long to ricochet home. I miss my children too much if I'm away for more than a handful of days. Every ticket purchase is a return one. Jumping ship, stowing away. As Mark Eitzel once sang, on the highways there's a million ways if you want to disappear. And all of us do sometimes, to seek out either chaos or calm, to eschew all demands made, to release ourselves from technology, to hide from grief. There is possibility in being lost, of being unlocatable, of being lifted without ties, like Lillian Bland's glider casting shadows on Carnmoney Hill, Dervla Murphy freewheeling over the Himalayas, Beryl Markham's first glimpse of the coast of Nova Scotia. Adventure operates in the realm of unpredictability, a storm at each crossroads, a cartographic blind spot. But we orient ourselves towards it, bending to the horizon, with all that it offers and conceals.
Really, really, really beautiful. And I agree, so appropriate right now when we're all locked down and stuck. I was thinking a bit about some of the women that you mentioned, particularly Dervla Murphy and her trip across Europe with, I think, a pistol and a compass and a few things. And you mentioned at the very start just about, we have, women want the adventure narrative and that a possibility of heading west or, lighting out. But there's also danger. And Dervla Murphy seemed that maybe you might just talk a little bit about her in that essay. Her story struck me so much.
She's an incredible woman, and she's still alive. She lives down near Waterford, and has gone on multiple long trips in her life. I talk about a couple of them in the book, and one was literally going all across Europe and then into all of the stands and over the mountains on a bike. Which she said she would do. She was given an atlas when she was very small, and it's just this idea of wanderlust and moving around and going to different places never left her. And when she was older, she went on she had a daughter, and she brought her daughter and a mule, and she had a little kind of cart for her daughter who she brought with her. And I just talk about the idea that of in the the 60s, the idea of a woman going off with her child and venturing around, a great peril to some people, but also because the narrative of what you get to do and who you get to be as a woman, that you must be straight, and you must be a wife, and you must be somebody who has lots of children, and all those kind of narratives that we've been used to seeing and we grow up around in Ireland, that Dervla Murphy was very outside of that because she chose it. And I think that obviously not everybody gets that choice, and that's one of the things I talk about. There's the glamorization of adventure, and when often you need a lot of money to do it. It helps if you're, a cis male to go off and do it. And it also, wasn't an option for lots of the women in my family. It's not an option for a lot of women, especially women who get left holding babies or aren't supported or had families who worried about them. So I think it takes an awful lot of guts to do what Dervla Murphy did. And I think to look at her narrative running alongside what was happening to women here in terms of women being put into Magdalen laundries, women being forced to give up their children for adoption. We've seen a lot of those narratives talked about. Again, it's cyclical. We hear it all the time. It keeps coming up because the pain of it doesn't go away. There isn't acknowledgement of it. There isn't sufficient reparation made for those things that happened to women. And I admire Dervla all the more for doing what she did in terms of when that wasn't the accepted narrative that women were supposed to embody at the time that she was doing it. So yeah, I'm kind of, she's a total hero.
Sinead, I know that we're pressed for time because we are going to move in a few minutes to the, audiences from the question after Saeed Singh. So if people have questions for Sinead, if you could type them into the chat. I wanted to maybe close with two questions for you. One, as I know that you're working on a novel, and so you've gone from you began with the essay, you wrote the essay form, and now you've gone into a much longer form. And if you might just talk about what that experience transitioning from that is. And the second part of the question, which is connected to writing, is just I know that you're about to you and Louise Kennedy are going to be judging the Cordia's Sligo Arts Festival short story competition, part of Cordia Word. And a lot of our listeners this evening are probably interested in that competition or may have submitted. And I guess when you're reading, so maybe if you first talk about your writing, but then talk about you as a reader and what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Dovetailing two questions.
Yeah, no, not at all. The first question is about the novel. Believe it or not, the novel idea I've had for an incredibly long time, and I started it long before Constellations. I still have I'm in the middle of going at it with the hammer at the moment, and the prologue is pretty much the same prologue that I wrote over 10 years ago, I say at this point. But again, I just couldn't find. You need a lot of time for a novel, and to keep a whole, as you'll know, Una, to keep a whole novel in your head is very, very tricky. And I've just, again, always been doing multiple things and couldn't. I needed to run at it, and I just haven't had that time. I haven't been able to do it. And I think I learned a lot about writing, even though writing fiction and writing essays are two very different things. I feel like they come from part of my brain. The discipline and the regularity and the showing up and sitting down and doing it are exactly the same. You have to show up. It doesn't matter what you're writing, whether that's poetry or essays or novels. So gotten used to making it, and also convincing myself that it wasn't just a kind of sideline hobby thing, that this is a proper thing I can do, and which I didn't know when I was working on the essays. That I didn't know if they'd be well received or people would be interested in them, and then if it crashes and burns horribly, I can go back to doing all the things I usually do. So yeah, they feel like very different parts of my brain. The novel, I'm on another draft of it now, and it feels like every time I fix one part of it, it's like a big Jenga thing. I fix a part, I'm like, oh God, I'm gonna have to go over there and fix that bit. So I have a lot still to do on it, and it's very different. I find it really hard, actually. But there's days, you get the odd day, as I'm sure you know, and you get the odd day where it does go really well, and you're like, great. But they're so rare. Most days it's tears and pain, and what am I doing? But mostly, yeah. But then you get the odd kind of, I wouldn't even say day, maybe hour, half a morning, where it's going okay, and you go, right, I have to keep doing it. But I can't let it go now. But also, I will say this about it: the idea is very specific, and it's about a specific phenomenon, and it has literally haunted me. Like literally, I joked to somebody that like I murdered it and buried it in the back garden, and the kind of Carrie style came up out of the grave and keeps coming after me. So I can't get away from it, and I feel. Peter Murphy, who's a wonderful writer, he's like, those ideas are the ones that don't let you go, are the ones that have to be written. And I feel like I'm almost kind of writing it to get it off my back at this stage. But I really like this idea, and I'm hoping I can pull it together and do it properly. In terms of the short story, I love judging short story competitions. That's why I agree to do it, because I'm always hoping for that thing. The thing I've kind of tried to do with that when I've been looking for work for the previous anthologies I've edited is that you go digging in the archives for older work, and you hope you're going to find something incredible, a total gem that no one's read or everyone's forgotten about. And with short story competitions, to me, people always ask, what are you looking for? I'm just looking to be surprised, because it's incredible when you get 70 or 80 or 20 stories in a batch for a competition. It's amazing how people write about the same things. Often it's the same themes, it's very similar characters. And it's okay to write about familiar subjects. That's not to say you have to go off and write about, do an Ishiguro and go off and write about AI or robots. You don't have to do that. But if you're going to write about something familiar, make it new. So that's what I kind of say. If it's familiar, it's a big subject we all know, do something different with it. And then don't be afraid to surprise yourself and go outside of things. And I think, the short story, people think you can't do much in 10 or 12 pages, but I think you can. I think language is where you'll really have to watch out for things in the short story. That's the thing I often notice, how good someone's sentences are. Are they a sentence level writer? And I kind of like that a lot too. But there's loads of reasons. Sometimes it's someone else better than me said, it's like being in love. You don't know what it is until it's right in front of you, and there it is. So sometimes it can take you by surprise what you're after. But yeah, writing what trying to do. I'm reading Claire Louise Bennett's next novel, which is out later this year, and I think of her as very singular. And it strikes me that Claire Louise doesn't pay attention to what anybody else is doing. She just does what Claire Louise Bennett does, and that's why she's so singular, and that's why she's so unique. So yeah, if you can get that into your head when you're writing, I think that's something to strive for.
Thanks, Sinead. And can I ask you now to introduce, first I want to thank you, because I think after this it'll be Lou will take over the Q&A from the audience. So thank you so much. But you invited Sive here to be with you this evening. I was wondering if you could introduce her before she sings her next song.
Absolutely. My husband, if you've read Constellations, has mentioned Constellations quite a bit, and he is a studio engineer and producer and composer. And I heard of Sive because Steve mixed and worked on The Roaring Girl, which is an album of hers, came out in I think 2017, and I just loved it, and I loved her voice. And I started out as a music journalist, and another thing I'm working on at the moment with somebody else's book about music, but that's another long story for next year. So music is a huge thing for me, and I've always tried to. I used to write about it. I'm always trying to keep up with stuff, and there's a lot of really incredible women making music in Ireland at the moment, and I just think that Sive doesn't sound like any of them. I think she has just such a distinct voice. She's doing something really ethereal, something brilliant and folklorish, and ultimately very modern and wonderful. And I have a playlist on Spotify of which is all women, and it's women, non-binary and trans women, by the way, and happy Trans Visibility Day to everybody who's watching. So yeah, I think that's I just think her voice is really magical, and you'll hear it if you heard it in the song at the start. And it convinced people to absolutely listen on Spotify, but do buy artists' work via their own websites or Bandcamp or wherever they sell their music, because these are tough times for artists. So yeah, she's wonderful and magical, and you'll see why.
So this next song I'm going to play for you is called Inside Out, and I chose it, I suppose, for this event because Sinead's book Constellations was a really important book for me. It was one of those books that kind of just comes to you at the right time in your life, and it also kind of opened a door for me into a literary genre that I hadn't become acquainted with before, kind of the personal essay and people writing about bodies and illness and stuff that you don't necessarily hear talked about explicitly in songs quite as much. So I would credit Constellations really as being one of the things that helped me write this song. And yeah, I've never played it in public either, so this is the world premiere. This is Inside Out.
Tried to be her friend, told her I'd listen, she knew I was pretending. I tried to be her friend, told her I'd be kind, I lied again, and oh, I lost her love. Whispered, I plead again, wash it all away, and I can't look the other way around. The other way, there is no other way, and I can't look her in the face, and I can't turn myself upside down. The other way, see myself from inside out. Dig deep for history, but I have no detector. I dig under the wrong tree, so I let the stranger in. An excavation through fields of scan. I don't deserve her love, 'cause I can't wash it all away, and I can't look the other way around. The other way, there is no other way, and I can't look her in the face, and I can't turn myself upside down. The other way, see myself from inside out. Oh, I've lost her love. She's given me her blood, but I lost her love. I lost her love, her love, her love. And there's a fire, it's all in my head, a fire. That's what you said, you move me like a rag doll. And there's a fire in the diagram, a fire. That's all I am, a mountain of muscle and bone. If it's all in my head, tell me, where does that end and my body begin? I can't see myself from inside out. I tried to be her friend.
Wow. That was so beautiful. I feel so strange not to hear applause ringing in my ears after that. I could feel the applause in my heart. Really stunning. Thank you so much. That was the easiest follow on Spotify I've had in a long time, lads. So we have some questions, Sinead. We've loads of comments, but we've so many questions. I'm just going to go to the questions. So the first one I have here is from Alice. When you were asked to compose The Art of the Glimpse, what was the very first story that you thought had to be in it?
Oh, really hard question. Very briefly, I think it was probably Janet McNeill, who's a Northern Irish writer who included in The Glass Shore, who's utterly brilliant and had until then been quite forgotten. There's no single collection. You can only find her stories, Belfast Telegraph, Irish Press, but a wonderful small publisher in the north called Turnpike Books have published 3 or 4 of her short stories together. And I just think she's wonderful and like a master. And often happens with writers, there isn't a single collection. They never put out one collection. Kate O'Brien is not in this book for that reason. Another brilliant queer writer. But yeah, it's hard to find the work sometimes. And writers get more forgotten for the short stories if they've written loads of novels and then never put out one collection. So yeah, Janet McNeill probably would be one of the first ones I wanted, because I had some of the stories from Queen's.
Thanks, Sinead. From Anne O'Brien. Hi, Sinead. How did you decide how to order the essays in Constellations? Did you follow certain principles?
That would be editors. I had a rough outline, and then they kind of move it around. And it's funny that this is the American one. They wanted to move a couple of up. So the American one is a little bit different. They moved a couple more up. I think they saw more of a grouping with some of the more the essay Our Mutual Friend. They wanted closer to the front. But for me, I kind of wanted it to be sort of bodily something else. So obviously the hair and the Lourdes essays are near the start, but there's some things thematically link on. Other times I thought I wanted to give people a bit of a palate cleanser when they've gone through something a bit, that was a bit intense. Let's try something else over here. And yet, as I mentioned already, adventure narrative came after the piece about my grandmothers, because it was again contrasting the lives of women who got to fly around the world in biplanes and women who never got to get out of inner city Dublin and shared a room with 15 people, that really struck me. So yeah, sometimes it was sad. It was always going to end with the non-letter as well. I think just because it's a generational thing. My grandmother, great grandmother, my mother, me, my daughter, and I think hopefully because of a lot of the stuff talks about the bad things that happened to women in Ireland. My daughter's life's already changed immeasurably compared to what mine was growing up and my mother's. So I wanted it to end with that positivity that it's different for women and non-binary people growing up now, for sure. Thankfully, still a lot to do, but.
Yes, and thank you for saying Happy Transgender Day of Visibility. That made me very happy too.
Good, yeah. It's brilliant.
So our next question then is from Diane. She says, hello Sinead, is there another theme or anthology that you would like to compile in the future? And do you feel positive about the future of the literary world and opportunities in Ireland?
I am doing another anthology. I'm already working on it, as I mentioned, but it's not short stories. It's maybe I shouldn't say. It's nonfiction. It's music, and it's with somebody else who is one of my absolute heroes. And it will be announced in a couple of months. So that's been really interesting to get to commission. Just, I think, fantastic people for that book. And it's a different kind of book, obviously, but it's all completely new work. So it's not, none of it is like this anthology where you're pulling things out of the archives. It's all brand new commissioned pieces on specific themes. In terms of the short stories, I think I've done, and also, they're just my views and subjectivity. Somebody else will do a different anthology. If Lou, if you did, if Una did, if Louise Kennedy did, they'd all be different books. If Alice Lyons did, so I'd like someone else to do it, so I can just sit back and read it and not have to do the work. But I hope they keep continuing, because I know with the Glass Shore, like other things came out of that, like the Female Line, which had been published by a small kind of working class women's cooperative in the 80s, had republished that, and then the Female Line came out of that. So there was a lot of anthologies can beget other anthologies and other books. So I hope that I'm just part of the link. There are lots of brilliant people before me did it, including lots of women, like Alva Smith, like Caroline Walsh. So I'm just part of the train. The other people are going to come after me, I hope, and keep doing it, because we need to keep reminding people how great and the vast breadth of Irish literature is. But in terms of the future, I am hopeful. I think that Catherine Martin, the Minister for Arts, has tried to step up and do a lot more in terms of a lot more money seems to have been rolled out in the last year than I haven't seen in a long time. And I've been keeping tabs on the politicians and arts ministers for years, and it does seem like a real effort is being made. Obviously, these are different times, and it's very difficult for people in theatre. I know a lot of actors, I know a lot of musicians, obviously, and that's just, my heart's broken for a lot of those people. So that aspect of the arts, I'm feeling very morose about, to be honest. In terms of writing, I think we're in an incredible place. But like I say, it's important to look out for who's not on the stage, who's not in the anthology, who's not been talked about. Always, watching out for who's on the periphery and trying to bring them in. So that's something that has to be done on an ongoing basis by anybody who's doing this kind of work, I think.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. We have another question from Tara McGowan, and you've addressed the first part of it, but she asked what you're working on now, but also if she feels the current situation has impacted on her creative process. Can it feel like an escape into another world, or is it harder to get to that place during lockdown?
Yeah, I have a good friend who's also a writer. He said, Sinead, at the moment it's parents and non-parents. That's the way the world is at the moment. At the same time, I've written a lot in Constellations about illness and mobility and disability, and I think that a lot of people are having their first encounter with their world being curtailed and made smaller. Whereas lots of people I know have chronic health problems or disability issues. This is their life. This is what goes on for them all the time. So I think when people are complaining about the lockdown, there are people whose lived experiences like this all of the time. And I think that's worth remembering and reminding yourself. In terms of my own situation, yeah, it's been a lot slower for sure. Kids being home, I feel for them. They miss their pals. They don't want to be at home. There's a bit more interruption and stuff. At the same time, weirdly, I have kind of started another little small non-fiction thing. I don't know if I'll ever show it to anybody, but it's only in a notebook. I don't want it anywhere near my computer, and it's me thinking about lots of different things that I might put it together into something that might come out of it. It will definitely not be, the words lockdown, pandemic, COVID will not be anywhere near this book, because it's not about those things, but it's definitely about my changes in time and perception. And I've got a couple of things coming up this year with artists. I'm doing something with Aidan Barry. I'm doing something with Alice Marr and Rachel Fallon. And I've always written a lot about art, and I'm thinking a lot about durational art and artists as well, because this kind of feels a bit like that at the moment. But so it's changed me. It's also made me, I think a lot of people, maybe all of us, have reassessed that who do we give our time and attention to? What amount of faffing can we cut out when we could be doing things and focusing more when everything's been taken, all the structures and things that we have in place to facilitate our life working at a certain kind of pace or level are largely gone. So I've had bursts. It's been bad sometimes, like everybody else. I can barely read anything, let alone write anything. And then other times I'm like, okay, because I don't have to go and do all these other things, or it's made me very reflective, and fed up from time to time. But mostly, very lucky that I'm still around and people I know are still around, and I hope we are, as we keep hearing, on this home stretch. But we're all a bit tired now, aren't we? I think.
Yeah, it's definitely a time for slowing down. I mean, it's an enforced slowing down, but also like to do it consciously and intentionally, I think is really important too, to actually get the goods out of it. Yeah. From Maeve O'Hare, she asks, in The Art of the Glimpse, did you choose the authors for the anthology, and could the authors choose their own short stories for the collection?
No, I did choose, because from past experience, you can, otherwise you'd get somebody. I did have a couple of people kind of going, oh no, it's great that you want to include me, but I don't really want that story in a book. And also I know this myself. I don't know how I feel about Constellations in 10 years time, but there's one or two people who just said absolutely love to be in there, but I need to go back and read that story and make sure it's not terrible. It's from 20 years ago. God, it might be really embarrassing. And of course it wasn't, and I picked it for the reasons that I really liked it. But no, most of the time I had a specific story in mind, or I knew I'd get into loads back and forth with, I think, 60 or so of the writers are still alive, and then we'd be going around the houses for a long time. So and again, all of them have multiple stories I would have loved to use. The other thing that happens with anthologies is the size of it. I mean, my favourite Joyce story is The Dead, but it's 60 pages. By money, it takes a lot of money to clear the copyright for some stories. I had to let go of some pieces that I loved and then replace them with something else. So always go in with one story, and there's no bargaining then.
You're breaking up for us.
I think one or two people said I'm not crazy on that story. I asked also writers who just didn't want to be in the collection, who don't like their previous work. I'm not going to mention any names, but just went, no, I hate all my stories, don't want to be in it, but thanks. So, which is really honest.
Yeah. I have one last question here from Siobhan Mahoney. She asks, although state-sanctioned censorship has somewhat dwindled, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, Kazuo Ishiguro in a recent interview warned of young writers self-censoring out of fear due to online discourse. Do you have any advice for writers that may wish to write about controversial subjects?
Write them, is what I say. I don't think I wrote about anything terribly controversial in Constellations, but I did know that if I started to get afraid where anything might get anything, well, it's difficult. There's a different kind of danger involved in writing about things that are personal to you and difficult to write about and upsetting or visceral or bodily or just hard to write about, like grief, for example. And I knew that there were places that if I stopped myself from writing them or tried to censor or edit early on, I think it would have been fatal for the work. I think it would have shown up. I think the work would have been lesser, and people would have, found me out, basically. And I think most of the work I like and I'm attracted to is work that's difficult, that's controversial, that's raw, that's close to the bone. I like work that takes risks. And I think that if you're going to be a writer of any substance and you're already afraid of cancel culture or what people are going to say about you, then maybe you need to rethink whether you want to be a writer. Because all of the work that over the years, lots of the work I've liked has taken risks. And also you'll have editors, and then you'll have legal departments within your publisher who will then tell you, well, if you say that, we're going to be sued and we'll all lose all our jobs. But it's always worth getting it down on the page. You don't have to, you can write something for yourself and not publish it if you feel really strongly about something. But where it gets into difficulty in modern life is writing things that are then hurtful to other people, whether that's with racism or transphobia or that we've seen a lot of awful stuff being said about travellers very publicly. And I thought we were getting more progressive in the world, and it feels like there's a lot of recessiveness going on, and public discourse on platforms where people use language to be hurtful. It kind of alarms and saddens me that people are using those very platforms that can bring us wonderful words and writers and people we wouldn't have necessarily read, but it's also the same platform that people are hugely offensive and bigoted on as well. So don't be afraid, write everything. You can always decide at some point to take it out, or if you are going to get into trouble, an editor might warn you and caution you, or it might get published and you'll get really famous for just saying what you want to say. But I wouldn't. I think if you're going to start from a place of fear, maybe writing's not for you.
Yeah, I heartily agree with that, Sinead. There's a lot to be said for the zero draft, for that notepad like what you have. That's just, I don't know if I'm ever going to share this. I'm just going to let it flow. I'm just going to see what it is, because if the voice, if the censor is too strong, nothing's going to come out. You can't write from fear, for sure.
No.
So that is the end of our questions from the audience. And I just want to ask Una, after those questions, was there anything else that you were wanting to ask before we go to our open mic?
But thank you so much to everyone in the audience who asked questions, and to Sinead and to Sive for being here. And Lou, thank you so much for facilitating tonight. Brilliant.
Thanks, Una.
Thank you all so much. And thank you, Lou. I know you stepped in very late notice. Thank you to you and to Michelle, to Una and to Sive. It's wonderful. Thank you for the great questions as well. They're wonderful. Thanks.
Thank you to the audience. Fantastic questions. And Sinead, thanks for being so inspiring and for including everybody. That's really beautiful to hear, that your consciousness of watching people from the outside, whoever is not being included, and bringing them in. And thank you so much. So in that spirit, we now move on to our open mic, and I'd ask our open mic people to accept the invite to turn on your mic. And the first person we have, scrambling to find the mic button, is Seth Toohey. Seth, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, perfect. I'm going to read two very short poems. The first one is called Loser. The word poem has become synonymous. You'll start again. The word poem has become synonymous with your face, because every time I press my biro to the page with the intent of writing one, you are all I can see. And then my second one doesn't have a title. The jeans hanging on the clothes horse try to strangle me with their thighs. The sewing kit on the desk wants to truss me up like a turkey until I can't escape. The leopard on the bookshelf glares and threatens me every time I walk past her. The pile of post-its taunts me with all their blank pages. The empty shelf in the fridge refuses to magic anything more up, and I eat another bowl of pasta and frozen peas. My bed is warm and enticing, but as soon as I settle in, it keeps me trapped.
Thank you, Seth. Beautiful. And next we have Lauren Baker. Are you there, Lauren?
I am. Hello. Hi. There we are. Hi. I'm going to read two poems. So please excuse my pronunciation of the Irish. I'll start with Doraku. A water dog loose on the evening cleared beach, seesaws clacking down the cliff, scatters pebbles at the sight of suddenly me. I freeze, afraid for a moment, despite the distance. He's big, giant as a hound, and moving fast, with intent, not meandering, purposeful. Is he coming for me? Strange thing. Flat-headed, kelp dark pelt, runs to a pointed tail as long as he. Madroshka, out looking for his otter wife. Utter relief. He heads for the water and slips the riven muscle of his frame in one vanishing movement beneath. Between the tasseled shoulders of the rocks and reefs, switching elements with all the ease that you or I take walking through the open doorway of our house. And the second is untitled. Tonight, the beach is a mirror. A cloud's stretched wing leaps from the dune. Red sun staining the sky's clean sheet, the brightly singing newborn moon, all gleam beneath my eager feet. Faint blushing glow, the sand beckons, slick smooth and cool as salt-washed skin. It breathes as free in evening light as thought that whispers from within, the distance you could run tonight. A hushing, the mirror distorts. Along the shining, pregnant ground, the sea draws up its woolen shore. Turned towards the turf smoke, homebound, I climb the dunes, try not to fall. Thank you.
Beautiful, Lauren. Thank you. So sensory. I can taste the salt on my lips. Beautiful.
Thanks.
So next we have Andrew Pelham-Byrne. Are you there, Andrew?
Yep.
Come in.
Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Good. Yeah, I'm going to do two poems as well, so it's a bit of a trend. The first one's called Prospero's Pleasure. A sun-selected field painted pale gold to catch the eye. Water falling from the bog, a tambour to catch the ear. And a rainbow holds a promise forever out of reach. Giddy children and romantics feel the pull, the urge, not just to watch, but needing more, to clutch to the heart all the wonders of the spectacle. With the avarice of poachers, we think we own these scenes. We are, though, but occasional audiences to nature's playful whimsy. A street theatre where spontaneous acts unfold and, if unseen, Ariel will still dance for Prospero's pleasure. And this second one's a little bit less Shakespearean. Waving goodbye, not hello. It's not easy to walk the shore and not believe in the mutable self and the stable society. Rocks layered with seaweed, unstable. Tides blown offshore, rearing to make land. And yet there is precipitation, evaporation, solstice, blue moons, the Bethlehem star, annual, millennial, imperceptible. Whiplash suffered from Janusian schizophrenia. They can talk out of both sides of their mouths. Stock up, lockdown, wet pubs, €9 meals, 5K, 7K, inter-county transmigration. Pull together, frontline workers, heroes. Suspicion, denunciation, isolation, uncertainty, refutability, coercion, distrust, propaganda. The old tracks to the islands reappear, fragile yet new each tide, rooted in time. A walk to Ilinatagat is within my limit. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. I could do with a bit of inter-county transmigration myself at this stage. So next up we have Maria Hamill. Maria, are you there?
I'm here.
Hi,
This is
Maria.
a poem called, I'm just also doing two poems. The first one is called Travel Sickness. So, Sick to my stomach, I lie alone, sick in the head, I'm hallucinating. Different worlds, shifting realities just to find a purpose in them. High. I'm high because the second I'm not high, I'll use my powers to find ways to die. Counting to 100, counting backwards, to unlock that part of my brain that says, hey, you want to live, there's good in this reality. It's overwhelming. I feel like I might pass out or throw up. Travel sickness, or is it the meds? I can't even tell what time it is. What world is this one? Hell. And this one is called Candle. The candle is burning, but instead of the scents of apple I was promised, it fouls my chapel with its wick's violent flickers of rotting flesh. The smoke replaces my senses, and I hear the last chimes of my smoke alarm before all is rotting. The wax drips onto her back. Drip, 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 and she rises again. She puts out the flame with her fingertips, refusing to smell but the apple. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Maria. And next we have Amy Edwards.
Hi, I'm just reading one poem, and it's called Rhyming is Sick. Okay. Call the writers and the scholars because rhyming is sick. She's come down with something quickly and it's starting to stick. The verse, he also has some symptoms, so I hope he's okay. Without him, we'll be left with nothing and we'll be led astray. I just talked to Simile and they're not feeling too well. They told me that they have a headache and it's starting to swell. Someone told you rhyming's not contagious, and well, I think that they're wrong, because all these feelings in my chest that I have caught are too strong. The end. Thank you.
I love that, Amy. I started to kind of groove with you there. I was feeling the rhythm. And so thank you. Last but not least, we have David North. David, come through.
Hi. I'm just reading a micro essay that I wrote a couple of years ago. It's called An Anglo-Saxon Funeral. They die. You turn up at the crematorium. You sing a song. The vicar tells us how wonderful they were, even though he never met them in his life. You eat a sandwich. You go home. 10 years later, you suddenly remember they're gone. You go to visit their grave. There isn't one. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, David. Thank you, everybody, all of our brave contributors to the open mic. It do take nerve to get up on that silent stage, staring into the abyss, reading your work. So thank you so much, everyone, for sharing. So we've come to the end of our evening, and I'm so delighted. Thank you so much to Sinead and to Una, to Sive, to all of our wonderful audience for your comments, and to our open mic folk. We will be back again this time next month with Una Mannion talking about The Crooked Tree. And on Thursday, the 8th of April, we will have our former colleague at Sligo Libraries, Louise Kennedy, launching her new book. So you can get tickets for that on Eventbrite. I don't think they're up just yet, but they will be very shortly. So we look forward to seeing you then. So once again, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again soon. Take care. Bye.
Yeah, so I'm going to do one more song. Thanks again so much to everyone for having me. The last song that I'm going to do, Sinead mentioned the other day that she might read something from the adventure narrative, so I was just kind of reading through it again, and I suppose what stuck out at me was like just that real pull between domesticity and adventure, freedom to adventure, and the idea that even when you do get to adventure, the build-up is so big that it can't but be a disappointment, and it's very hard to just kind of stay in the moment. And I guess this song is something I wrote when I was feeling that real pull between really wanting to jump out and force change, but also just feeling afraid and wanting to stay comfortable and trying to find that balance really and be in the moment, I suppose. So this is called Tenloch. Tenloch is another word for hearth in Irish, Tealach. So yeah.
Chasing leaves, winter high, liberties blowing here and there. Well, I'd like to catch them and lay them all out on the hearth, but still they decay. So what am I chasing here? But if I could float along, I wouldn't care if I was going anywhere at all. Tenlock, the meg fannacht. Oh, tenlock, tow'r them the harp, the cradle of. Oh, just stay, 'cause when you go my bones ache. Come sit by the fire, it's all